pleasure of being joined by Neil Hopkins today. He's the Senior Communications Specialist, so much experience in marketing to share with us. So I guess the first place for us to start is, how did you get into marketing?
Oh, if I can think that many years ago, Jenna. No, I started really as a storyteller. So I actually started in journalism and what would now be called content marketing. So I was writing for local newspapers throughout the UK, specifically around motoring and lifestyle and so on. And I worked my way around. I sort of felt my way into the industry, and so it would now be called content marketing. Back then, it didn't really have a cohesive term. But I moved through that and picked up some freelance work as well. So sort of telling stories, branched out into some charity work, started to get more into sort of segmentation and kind of understanding all the background to the shiny campaigns that everyone sort of saw coming together. I then spent some time in PR, and again, really brought, I think, quite a marketing focus to a PR practice. So really getting into segmentation, really starting to move also into more behavioural side of the work as well. So moving into social marketing. And again, when I first met up with the European social marketing folk, it was such a new discipline, almost didn't have a name. But I think my biggest launch into marketing, sort of with the capital M marketing, was when I moved into road safety. And I really had the opportunity, I had the team, I had the budget, I had the cause to start doing all the sort of really good marketing segmentation, research, design, development, that whole cycle that before then I'd been feeling my way into, but just hadn't had the privilege of diving in feet first and reveling in.
Really varied. So what does your current role involve?
So currently, I'm actually in between. You caught me in between contracts. So the last few years, I've been working as interim communications specialist. I've worked in the NHS. I've worked in local government. I've worked regionally across London. And most recently, I was working on the COVID-19 response, specifically around mortality management. So an interesting niche that 18 months ago didn't exist. No one would have thought it ever would need to exist, but unfortunately it does. And so really, again, that is a lot of stakeholder management, a lot of internal communications, media management, so preparing for international news stories, which did come. But again, using my sort of marketing and social marketing background, trying to really get into that space of how do we, if I say sell the story, that sounds a bit too salesy, but how do we position it in such a way that it lands exactly as it needs to with each of the audiences all the way through? And how can we then back that up with other pieces of content that people can use, can put out into their networks, and actually start developing some trust and understanding of this big thing that's happening regionally, but is affecting so many people individually as well. And when I haven't been doing that, I've been working on some freelance gigs as well. So working with companies of a number of different sizes, trying to get the stories, literally get the stories straight in some cases, get strategy built, start working out, feeling into the tactical, into the content marketing side, and really helping them to connect at a deeper level with their customers, new and prospective.
Lots of variety there as well. So just on that COVID messaging, that did you find that quite challenging in terms of the context, like being quite sensitive in that message? Like, how did you approach that?
So I started in November, specifically on the last contract, and I was working on mortality management. So the background to it is, the sort of background of the background is that when people die in the UK, there's what's known as sort of the level of death. And then there's an excess death. So in flu season in the winter, the levels go above what you'd normally expect into excess death. And so on, and then they come back down in the summer. It's a cycle. With COVID-19, that excess death obviously went up massively and tragically. And so the work I was doing was around the reverent storage for the deceased in London to make sure the mortuaries didn't become overwhelmed, so that the bereaved could be confident that their loved ones and that the people they were mourning were treated in the way they want to be treated all the way through from the place of death to the place of final burial or cremation and so on. So it was really difficult. It was really emotionally challenging. It was very political as well. It was, I say, regional, big budgets involved in all these things, and everyone wanted to do it absolutely right. So it really was a case for me of kind of feeling into those areas, understanding some of the nuances, and speaking personally, I had very little experience with death management beforehand. A few members of my family have died and so on, but never really the, if you will, the behind the scenes, the understanding of how the process works. And so it was trying to get into that and make sure all the way through the messaging didn't become about what was essentially, if you like, an infrastructure project, the putting up of a temporary mortuary, but really held the deceased and the needs of their mourners front and centre throughout. So it was kind of keeping that balancing act all the way through. It was difficult, but I feel very, very privileged to be able to do it. It was an opportunity to really get into some culturally competent communications, and listen, just really, really listen to the needs of different communities and try and respond to those needs through the communications that we were putting out, whether that was content potentially for websites, leaflets, you name it, whatever was needed, making sure that it landed really well with the respect and with the reverence that it deserved. So it was quite a balancing act for the best part of 7 months, but one that I'm very, very privileged to have been able to do. Obviously, I do hope I never have to do it again, and hope and for the success of the vaccination program. But I've been privileged to do it.
Yeah, something that almost doesn't feel quite right to say is great to be part of, because you'd hope that you'd never have to be part of that. But just to be able to balance that context is a real skill, and be able to really understand the context of the end recipient of that message, something you're better take in any organization with you now.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what do you have any kind of advice for aspiring marketers who might be studying marketing or just joining the industry?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed more recently in my career, probably in the last half of it, is being able to be broader than just one discipline. So really looking outside and finding pieces that work from other disciplines, from PR, from pure advertising, content marketing, from the different divisions, and trying to bring them into a more holistic whole, and actually just being really nosy, really curious, and going to find out what other people are doing, borrowing where possible, building on in other areas. I think it's quite easy to become quite single track focused and say, I do X and this is all that I do, and then you get that sort of ivory tower syndrome. But yeah, really try and get outside of that, see what else is out there. There's some amazing work being done that's not pure marketing, but that can then come in and influence. And also a book recommendation, obviously yours, naturally, but a book called Propaganda by a guy called Edward Bernays. He's the founding father of public relations, as it was back then, but there's so much in there that is directly applicable to modern marketing practice. It's an amazing book. It's quite short, quite controversial in some places, but I can really, really recommend it. When I read it, it was one of those moments when, just as kind of my own marketing practice was opening out, I was like, oh, there are just so many tools in here I can use and I can pick up and take and remix for today's needs.
Brilliant to have a book recommendation. Well, two there, but brilliant to hear those as well. So in my book, Marketing Strategy, you highlight two myths that are stopping companies from developing an effective marketing strategy. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about these two myths and where your experiences come from here.
Yeah, sure. So obviously good marketing strategy, I think, should be short, sharp and snappy, to the point, and really help companies move through to where they need to go. They don't have to be prescriptive. And I think a lot of companies fall down just in the idea of we must do a strategy. They think, it's going to be this 50, 70, 100-page document that's going to sit on the shelf, and it must be weighty, and it must say our strategy is to use LinkedIn. Lordy, no, please keep them simple. Keep them simple, keep them short, because things change. And I think companies can get so tied into listing everything that they think they need to do that it just becomes unwieldy, and then it takes all the fun. And marketing should be fun. And marketers should have fun. It's one of my big career things. Have more fun. And actually, if you've got this strategy that says you must do X, Y, and Z, you'll never be able to break out of that, because as soon as you try and break out of it, it's got to go through all the layers of management or whatever else. What it needs to be is directional. And something I don't often recommend the US military strategy, but if you ever happen to read the US military strategy, it's really, really short. It's about 5 pages, the first bit, and then the rest is a bit more tactical. But it basically just sets the direction, it sets the tone, and then it lets the people who do whatever needs to be done go off and do it. And actually, for marketers, that could be such a liberating thing to have a strategy to say, this is where we're playing, this is what we need to achieve, and this is why. It then gives you the freedom to go and explore stuff. And again, the strategies I've seen in the past, some of them list every single step on the journey, but that then doesn't take into account the fact that context changes. No one really saw COVID coming. So any strategy that says we will do this on this date and that on that date, and we will use this channel and that channel, we will use events, the entire strategy fell apart. Whereas all of that, of course, is tactical. But if the strategy had said, we will engage this segment in this for this outcome. You can bend it, you can change, you can shift with things that are outside of your control, and actually, I think, get a much better result. So that's where my two myths come from.
I mean, you're completely right there. I think that's the piece, isn't it, where organizations are heavily tactically focused. It makes it difficult to take a step back and have that bigger strategic view. Because without that, then you are very much channel orientated and you're chasing after the different channels.
Yeah, that's it. And sometimes, I mean, tactics are wonderful. It's how anything gets done. But they can have that instant reward mechanism to them. And so we must do X. We must put a post out on LinkedIn, or we must put a tweet out. You've done it. And everyone who doesn't really get marketing goes, oh, we've got a tweet out. And then 2 days later they go, what's it sold? What's happened? And yeah, tactics can be new, they can be shiny, they get people very, very excited. But that long game of short, sharp, snappy strategy, that's for me where the real gold is.
Yeah, exactly. Completely agree. So what do you think are the main challenges? And maybe you've come across some key ones with the clients that you've worked with when implementing a marketing plan or strategy.
So I think there's a few that kind of come to mind. There are some that I've worked with where there are such strongly held ideas about the audience or about the place they need to get to that it's really, really difficult to break those apart, to break them down. And if the ideas, let's say, about the audience don't kind of work, and if the idea is our audience is this kind of person, then actually from the research, you know that it's this kind of person who are using the product or enjoying the product, trying to marry those two and get maybe sometimes the leadership to understand that what they think is not right. That can be a real challenge. And again, it comes back a little bit to that ivory tower piece, and the marketing press and trade press have been talking about this for years with marketers, and that idea that you are not your customer. And actually you get some leaders and some sort of CEOs who think my customer essentially is me, and there's a million me's out there. And actually there aren't. There aren't that many. And so trying to flex those. Again, sort of lack of strategy, that's a challenge. And some marketers I know have certainly gone into organizations where there's just been no strategy and it's been tactic. But that doesn't really work because you can't get the fluency in the audience. Kind of 1 minute you look like this and the next minute it's all changed a bit, or the colours changed or the language has changed, and the audience don't know what's going on, so they leave, they go somewhere else, and that's difficult. And I think there's, again, that sort of specificity, so around the ideas of we must do X or we must do Y by on this date, locking those things in, just it stifles creativity, actually stifles tactical development, and really makes noise. There's no signal behind that sort of thing. And I think when you get, especially some senior leaders I've known in the past, we must use Twitter, somebody said. Why? The question had to come back, why? Our audience, the decision makers, are not on Twitter. Oh yes, but we'll look good. Do you want to look good, or do you want to actually sell some stuff? And that's kind of how the conversation went, a little bit more polite and business-like, but being able to bridge those gaps, and especially for younger marketers sometimes coming in, because companies think we must have some marketing, but they don't necessarily pay for people who've got the strategic long game. That can be really hard and really frustrating. And I've seen some really good people get frustrated and leave and go in other directions. So yeah, it's a difficult one, but trying to get leaders to behave, I think, is probably one of the more tricky things I've learned over my time.
It's kind of like overcoming those misconceptions as well of marketing. And I think just on that, what do you think are the most common pitfalls that a marketer faces?
So I think one's got to be that shiny new object syndrome. So every time, I'll pick social media, it's my favourite one to always pick on. Every time there's a new channel out, TikTok being one of them.
Or Clubhouse now.
Oh, yes. Yeah, on Clubhouse. But yeah, I've had conversations, and the Clubhouse actually is a perfect example. I've had that conversation, people saying, we must be on Clubhouse. Why? How does that inspire me? I'm open to it, but why? What is the strategic aim that this is going to come towards? What is the tactical benefit of doing this? And other people say, oh, well, loads of other folk are on TikTok. And do we need to be? Is this where our audience is? And actually understanding then where the audience is, or where the people you need to influence, where those pieces of behaviour need to be nudged. Understanding how to get to those will always get you to the right channels, and they might not be the most sexy channels. I mean, there's some great people out there doing some great work on email marketing, but it's not the flashiest. It's not the one that's going to be splattered across billboards everywhere. But actually, the research shows it's still there. It's still really good. And it gets really, really good results. And it's trackable, it's measurable, and it's improvable. And I think that sometimes having that shiny new object syndrome when people just dart to the new thing, they lose some really good stuff that actually the audience likes and has liked for a number of years. And it's understanding that, and it's balancing that. And there'll always be a shiny new object that will work really, really well, but quite a lot of them just won't. And it's having the opportunity to take that step back, as you said, Jenna, take that breath, take that strategic look. I think also there's one of the other big pitfalls is around stereotyping, and it's really easy to lazily stereotype large segments of populations. Go, all millennials are like this, all Gen Z are like that, and all boomers do this. And you look at some of the research when it comes out and you think, they just don't. And there's so many different subcategories and so on. It does get difficult, yes, to bring people together into usable market segments. But actually, that top level stereotyping, I mean, I'm an older millennial. I was born in 1982, so I'm one of the first, I think. And I always see this, millennials are saying this. No, they're not. And my friends aren't. We're sort of similar age. And even some of the people who are much younger millennials, almost Gen Z, aren't doing that. And so just that, being aware of that stereotyping and being aware actually that research can inadvertently push into those stereotypes, which then get kicked back on. There are no perfect people out there. I think there was a study in, I'm going to say Australia, that tried to find the Australian perfect research family. And research had shown that they had 2 children and a house this size, and the husband did that and the wife did that, and they literally don't exist. And so actually that kind of idea of the broad brush stereotype, it's just one of those things that is easy to drop into, but actually does more harm than good. And I think that's a pitfall that people just have to be aware of and avoid wherever possible.
It's interesting that you mention email there as a kind of old school tactic that is still standing the test of time. Obviously work a lot heavily in the email space, but it is very interesting that consumers repeatedly say that email is their preferred channel, yet as marketeers we will run after like Clubhouse and TikTok and not necessarily reflect on whether that's good and relevant to the audience.
Yeah, exactly. And again, even direct mail, let's take it offline for a second.
Yeah.
There's good things to be said for direct mail. I've used DM in the past to really good effect, and trackable effect as well. But it does come back down to where the audience are. If the audience are the types who will flock to TikTok and flock to Clubhouse and they'll jump onto the next new thing as it comes out, then great, that's where the brand needs to be. But actually for that solid, continual build, that relationship building, other platforms are just knock them out of the park in terms of engagement. And email is definitely one of those. The amount of email newsletters that people sign up for and read and do stuff with, it's survived the test of time, which is amazing when you think how frequently things turn over and what the churn on technology and kind of consumer preference is.
It is amazing when you think about that, and the ROI that you get back on it as well is still, it's untouchable to other digital channels. So it really is quite amazing how it stood the test of time.
And it's also yours. That's one of the things I'm quite passionate about with email marketing is it's yours. If Twitter shuts down tomorrow, there will be companies who go to the wall quite quickly, and sad, but they will almost instantaneously because that's the basket they put their eggs in, and they're dictated to. So like when Twitter changed from 140 to 280 characters, etc. When LinkedIn started allowing some new functionality, when Facebook fiddled with the algorithm yet again, all the industry kind of got really upset about it. But email's that channel that it's yours. You can brand it. You can make it look how you want it to look. It will always be yours. And that's quite a special thing in such a fast-changing world, really.
Yeah, massively. I mean, businesses that are looking for investment or to be sold, they will be asked, how many email subscribers do you have? Because it brings so much value to their business.
Yeah.
I think that, I've seen a huge growth this year in organizations really thinking about using email who haven't used it in the past. So I think that is something that we'll see more of, definitely, the more of the company having their own owned space, and email definitely gives that. From your experience and all that experience that you've gained and all those different companies and clients that you've worked with, what advice would you give your younger self if you were now starting out in marketing?
I think I would have to say, don't worry so much about perfection. So as I've gone through my career, I found there's that minimum viable product. I found that there's definitely a space that I can occupy in it. Some of it does come with age, with seniority and experience, but having that baseline to go out there and then start iterating, start experimenting with the market, start finding out what works and what doesn't. I think when I was younger, I was brought in on projects, and I was worried about not being seen as the person with the most knowledge in the room, or I was worried about not everything being absolutely tip-top perfect. And it did actually give me sleepless nights. Whereas as I've gone forward, I thought, well, yes, it needs a certain level of perfection and gloss, but there are so many opportunities for co-creation, collaboration. So bringing people into that conversation, whereas if you just present them with well, here it is, here's your Mona Lisa, no one's going to want to twiddle with the backgrounds, and then they won't feel ownership over it. So actually have that sort of more iterative, more collaborative piece. Don't worry about having all the answers. That was one thing I was very worried about when I was younger, was I need to have all the answers. I need to have all the answers. Actually, you don't. And it is fine to say, I don't know, I'll come back to you. Or, I don't know, why don't you tell me what you think, and let's get some other opinions, and just start that conversation going. I think, yeah, that's going to be the biggest piece of advice. And I wish I'd known it back then. It would have saved me a lot of sleepless nights.
Yeah, I love that. It's better to get something out there than never at all if you're aiming for perfection. I know there's a lot of people that talk about that, but I think I also sympathize with that. I think as you progress through your career and you get more confident, I think it's a confidence element that you realize that actually, yeah, okay, this is good enough. It's not perfect, but this is good enough. And then you can always evolve and build on that piece that you've done, like you've just said there, and get more people involved and then keep adding to it. That's a great reflection on your experience.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for contributing to the book and taking time out today to chat to me. It was an absolute pleasure, and best of luck in your new position.
Thank you. Best of luck with everything with you. It's been an amazing time to have a conversation with you, and I'm so excited that the book is now in the universe.